She came into my life when I had nothing left. Not even hope. She said she wanted to help, to be there for me. And for years I believed her. Every meal she cooked, every tear she wiped, every word she whispered felt like loyalty. But the thing about loyalty, it's hard to see when it's fake. I was sick, tired, and ready to leave everything behind. So I wrote my will. And she smiled, thinking she had finally won. But the truth was already written between the lines, waiting for its moment. The day that moment arrived, her mask shattered, and the friend I once loved became the stranger I feared. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The house was too quiet now, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest like weight. The clock on the wall ticked without mercy, reminding him that time was slipping through his fingers. Arthur, an old man with fading eyes and trembling hands, sat in his armchair by the window, staring at the gray sky. The world outside moved fast, but his life had slowed to a crawl. Ever since his wife passed away, the rooms felt colder, emptier, haunted by echoes of laughter that no longer existed. He often spoke to the air, pretending she still listened. But even the walls had grown tired of his voice. Then, one rainy afternoon, a soft knock on the door broke the stillness. A sound so gentle it almost felt like fate itself calling. Who could it be on such a lonely day? When Arthur opened the door, a young woman stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a broken umbrella, her hair plastered to her face. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," she said with a trembling smile. "I'm new to the neighborhood and my car broke down nearby." There was kindness in her tone, but something else too, something unreadable behind her soft eyes. Arthur, lonely and eager for company, invited her in without a second thought. She introduced herself as Clara, and as she warmed her hands by the fireplace, she spoke with charm and warmth that felt almost too perfect. Her laughter filled the empty spaces. Her words stitched themselves into the quiet. For the first time in months, Arthur felt alive again. But when she looked at the family photo on the mantel, her smile lingered a second too long. What was she thinking behind those calm eyes? Over the following days, Clara began visiting often, bringing groceries, cleaning his kitchen, and sharing long conversations over tea. She listened to Arthur's stories about his youth, his wife, his lost son, and the old estate he planned to leave behind. She called him Mr. A, laughing that it made him sound mysterious. Slowly, she became part of his daily routine. The sound of her footsteps, the smell of her perfume, the warmth of her presence. But sometimes, when Arthur would fall asleep in his chair, she would stand silently by the window, watching the road with a blank expression, as if waiting for something, or someone. And once, late at night, he woke to faint whispers from the hallway, her voice low and hurried, speaking to someone on the phone. But when he asked the next morning, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I must have been talking in my sleep." Then why, Arthur wondered, did she sound so awake? It was a quiet Sunday morning. The rain had stopped, leaving the world drenched and shining under a pale sun. Arthur sat at the kitchen table, his trembling hands wrapped around a cup of tea Clara had just poured for him. She sat across from him, smiling softly, that same patient, comforting smile he had grown to depend on. "You know," he said between slow sips, "this house, it's all I have left of her." His voice cracked when he mentioned his late wife. Clara reached across the table and held his hand gently. "She must have been wonderful," she said, eyes glistening with fake sympathy. Arthur nodded, staring at their joined hands. He didn't notice how tightly her fingers gripped his, like she was holding more than comfort. Then she asked softly, "And who will take care of all this when you're gone?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes, they were measuring. Arthur hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I haven't decided yet," he murmured. Clara tilted her head, her expression innocent. "You must, Mr. A. You worked so hard for this home, and it shouldn't fall into the wrong hands." Her words carried weight, careful and deliberate. She started helping him sort old papers, pretending it was just housework. But as she dusted his study, her eyes darted toward the drawer where he kept his property deeds. She noted every detail, The old clock above the safe, the pattern of his keys, even the sound the drawer made when it opened. That night, Arthur sat in his chair and smiled faintly to himself, unaware that while he dreamed of friendship, Clara was memorizing his world piece by piece. And when she whispered, "Good night, Mr. A," her voice carried something new: hunger. Days turned into weeks. Clara became indispensable. She handled his medicines, answered his phone calls, managed his mail. Arthur often said, "You're like the daughter I never had," and she'd blush with practiced modesty. But at night, when the old man slept, she made quiet calls in the hallway, her voice low, urgent. "Yes, he's alone. No relatives. Just a lawyer who visits once a month," she whispered. Her tone changed, colder, sharper. Then one night, Arthur woke up again to that same faint whispering. This time, he stepped closer to the half-closed door and caught a few words that froze his blood. "Once he signs the papers, it's all ours." He stepped back quietly, heart pounding, his mind filled with confusion and fear. Who was she really talking to? And what did she mean by ours? The winter arrived early that year, crawling through the windows and filling the old house with a cold that even the fireplace couldn't fight. Arthur's health began to falter. His hands trembled more, his breathing grew shallow, and his mind drifted in and out of foggy memories. Clara noticed every weakness like a hawk watching prey. "You shouldn't walk around so much," she'd say sweetly, taking the cane from his hand. "Rest. Let me handle everything." Her voice was soft, her movements tender. Yet something in the way she hovered over him felt suffocating, possessive. When Arthur tried to stand, she'd guide him back into the chair, smiling that same calm, perfect smile. The house began to feel less like home and more like a cage, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was slowly being trapped within it. But trapped for what? And by whom? One evening, Arthur woke from a nap to hear faint murmuring in the living room. He shuffled closer, hiding behind the half-open door. Clara was on the phone again, but this time her tone was sharper, colder. "No, not yet," she whispered. "He's weak, but still alert. I can't rush this." Arthur froze, gripping his cane tightly. The woman he thought cared for him spoke like a stranger now, strategic, calculating. As he stepped back, the floor creaked slightly. Clara spun around instantly, phone still in hand, but her expression softened into concern when she saw him. "Mr. A, you scared me," she said, forcing a laugh. "I was just calling the pharmacy." Her charm was quick, flawless, too flawless. Arthur nodded weakly, pretending to believe her. But inside, a quiet voice whispered, "She's lying." And once that thought entered his mind, it refused to leave. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified. The ticking clock, the wind scraping branches against the window, and footsteps, slow, careful, moving down the hall. His heart thumped as he watched the doorknob twitch ever so slightly. It stopped, then silence. Minutes passed before he heard her voice softly humming a tune outside, the same lullaby his late wife used to sing. It made his skin crawl. Was she mocking his memories? Trying to comfort him or control him? The next morning, he found his bedroom drawer slightly open, the one where he kept his old documents. Nothing seemed missing yet. He stared at it for a long time, unease twisting in his chest. Something told him the danger wasn't coming. It was already here, standing right beside him every day, smiling. But how could he prove it? Before it was too late? It was just past midnight when Arthur woke to the sound of soft laughter drifting from the living room. The house was dark, except for the faint orange glow of the fireplace, and her voice, smooth and sharp, cut through the stillness. He moved slowly down the hallway, his cane barely tapping the floor. Peering around the corner, he saw Clara sitting on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "Don't worry," she whispered. "Once he signs everything, it'll all be ours. The lawyer trusts me now." Her tone was laced with confidence, almost arrogance. Arthur's heart began to pound, each word echoing in his head like thunder. Ours, that word again. He stepped back quietly, hand trembling on the wall. His chest felt heavy, but not from sickness this time, and from realization. The woman who called him family was planning his end. The next morning, Clara greeted him with breakfast, pancakes, fresh fruit, and tea as if nothing had happened. Her smile was brighter than ever, her voice soft as silk. "You didn't sleep well," she said sweetly. "You look tired." Arthur studied her face, the warmth in her eyes, the gentle concern, and felt something twist inside him. How easily she lied, how perfectly she performed. "Just old bones," he muttered, forcing a smile. As she turned to wash the dishes, he noticed her humming the same lullaby again, the same song that once comforted him, now haunting him with every note. Arthur sipped his tea, but it tasted different today. Bitter, metallic. His eyes flickered toward her. "What did you put in the tea?" he asked softly. She froze for half a second, then laughed. "Oh, just honey, Mr. A. You worry too much." But that pause, that half-second of fear, told him everything he needed to know. When Clara left to pick up supplies, Arthur made his way to the study. Every step felt like dragging through sand, but determination pushed him forward. He opened the drawer she had tampered with before and stared at the will inside, the one written years ago. His late wife's handwriting still lingered on the corner of the page, a reminder of love and trust. And now that same paper had become a target of greed. He sat down slowly, breathing hard, and whispered to himself, "You chose the wrong old man, Clara." For the first time in months, there was a spark of strength in his voice. He reached for the phone and dialed his lawyer, Mr. Graves, a man who had served his family for decades. "We need to meet," he said quietly. "And this time, no one must know." Outside, through the window, Clara's car had not yet left the driveway. She was sitting inside, watching the house. The next afternoon, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, ready to pour. Arthur told Clara he needed rest and locked himself in his room. She believed him, or pretended to, as she left for town. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, Arthur moved faster than he had in weeks. He slipped on his coat, grabbed his walking stick, and stepped outside, the cold wind biting at his cheeks. His old driver, Samuel, was waiting quietly at the end of the lane, the one man he still trusted. "Take me to Mr. Graves," Arthur whispered as he climbed in. The car moved through the fog, the road empty and quiet. Every mile felt like a secret heartbeat. When they finally arrived at the lawyer's office, Arthur's eyes carried a strange calm, the calm of a man who'd seen betrayal and decided to rewrite fate itself. "Mr. Graves," he said, voice steady, "it's time for a change, a final one." Inside the dimly lit office, Mr. Graves adjusted his glasses and studied Arthur's trembling hands. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. Arthur nodded. "Completely. But it must stay between us. No one, not even my so-called caretaker, can know." Mr. Graves leaned forward as Arthur described his plan. The old will would remain as it was, a decoy. But the real one, the one that mattered, would contain a final message and a twist that Clara could never predict. Every word would expose her greed when the time came. Mr. Graves listened, both shocked and impressed. "That's quite a trap," he murmured. Arthur smiled faintly. "It's not a trap," he said. "It's justice waiting to speak." As they signed the final papers, thunder rumbled in the distance, like the sky itself approving the act. Outside, a flash of lightning revealed Clara's car parked across the street. When Arthur came home, the lights were off, but the front door was unlocked. He paused, uneasy. The air inside felt different, tense, as if the walls had been holding their breath. "Clara?" he called softly. No answer. He turned on the lamp, and there she was, sitting by the fireplace, pretending to read a magazine. "You were out long," she said lightly, her tone smooth but her eyes sharp. "I thought you weren't feeling well." Arthur forced a small smile. "Just needed some fresh air." She nodded, her gaze lingering on the envelope in his coat pocket before turning away. He could feel her suspicion hanging in the room like smoke. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Arthur slipped the new will under a floorboard beside his nightstand, hidden beneath layers of dust and time. And as the wind howled outside, he whispered to the darkness, Let her keep smiling. Soon she'll show her teeth. The following days carried an uneasy calm, the kind that hides thunder behind the clouds. Clara's behavior changed, though subtly. Her cheerful tone grew sharper at the edges, her smiles shorter, her glances longer. She began hovering more than before, always nearby, in the hallway, behind the door, watching him as he wrote letters or rested by the fire. "You've been going out lately," she remarked one afternoon while slicing apples in the kitchen. "Are you sure it's good for your health?" Arthur didn't answer, only smiled faintly. "Fresh air helps the mind," he said, watching her reflection in the window. For the first time, she didn't smile back. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled too tight. Then she turned and said softly, "You know you can trust me, right?" Her tone wasn't gentle this time. It was a question wrapped in warning. Arthur nodded slowly, though both of them already knew the truth. Arthur started pretending, more carefully than ever. He let her believe he was weaker, slower, more forgetful. He'd drop hints about his finances, feign confusion over the location of his documents, and watch her eyes flicker with greed each time. "You should rest," she'd say, taking the papers from his hands. "I'll keep them safe." He'd thank her, masking the quiet satisfaction in his voice. In secret, he began writing a journal, a detailed record of her every lie, every strange phone call, every word that didn't belong in a friend's mouth. The entries were hidden within the pages of an old Bible by his bedside, the last place she'd ever look. At night, he'd hear her pacing outside his door, sometimes stopping as if listening for movement. Once he heard her whisper his name, voice low and almost affectionate. "Arthur." He held his breath, pretending to sleep, wondering how much longer he could keep up the act. One evening, the tension broke like thin glass. Arthur sat at the dinner table, watching the firelight dance across the silverware. Clara placed his meal before him, but didn't sit down. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her eyes studying him with a stillness that made his skin crawl. "You trust your lawyer too much," she said suddenly. The words were sharp, cutting through the quiet. Arthur looked up slowly. "What makes you say that?" he asked calmly. Clara smiled, but there was no warmth in it now, only knowledge. "You talk in your sleep, Mr. A," she murmured. "You mentioned something about a new will." For a moment, neither moved. Only the crackle of fire filled the air. Arthur's fingers tightened around his fork, but his voice stayed even. "I dream nonsense," he said. "Don't listen to the words of an old man." Clara chuckled softly and walked away, whispering under her breath, "We'll see about that." Over the next few weeks, Clara's kindness turned into control. She started locking the front door at night. "For your safety," she said. But soon she began locking it during the day, too. She controlled what Arthur ate, when he rested, and who he spoke to. The phone stopped ringing. The mail stopped arriving. Even the gardener, who came every Wednesday, suddenly stopped showing up. "You don't need strangers around," Clara told him, her voice coated in sugar, but cold beneath. The sunlight rarely reached his room anymore. The curtains stayed drawn to protect his eyes. Arthur sat by the window one morning, staring through the tiny gap between the curtains, watching dust float like lost souls in the beam of light. He realized then he wasn't living in a home anymore. He was living in her world. Clara began monitoring everything, his phone calls, his letters, even his breathing. "You sound tired again," she'd say, pressing pills into his palm. He never swallowed them, only pretended to. He didn't trust anything she gave him now. One afternoon, while she was out, Arthur shuffled to his study, his heartbeat fast and uneven. He reached behind the bookshelf and pulled out a small, hidden audio recorder, a gift from his late wife. With trembling hands, he set it up under the table, pointing toward the living room. "You like talking, Clara," he whispered. "Let's make sure someone's listening." Hours later, she returned, and her phone calls resumed, cold, greedy, dripping with deceit. "He won't last long," she said softly, her laughter slicing through the silence. Arthur sat in his room upstairs, listening through the wall, each word carving itself into his soul. Now he had proof, and a reason to keep pretending. Clara's act grew more twisted each day. She began sitting closer to him, brushing his shoulder, touching his hand longer than needed. "You know, Mr. A," she whispered once as they watched the fire burn, "you mean so much to me. You've become my family." Her voice was low, almost tender, but her eyes gave her away. They were studying him, calculating his every breath. Arthur forced a faint smile. "And you, Clara," he said, "you've been a blessing." She smiled, pleased with herself, unaware that his cane had a small camera now hidden in its handle, capturing her every false gesture. When she left the room, Arthur exhaled shakily, a mix of fear and quiet triumph swirling in his chest. He was weaker by the day, but his mind was sharper than ever. And if she thought he was her prey, she was about to learn. Old wolves still bite. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. He sat in silence, staring into the dying embers, and in them, he saw her smile from the first day they met. "You look lonely, Mr. A. Maybe I can help." Her voice echoed in his mind like a haunting lullaby. He remembered the way she had once brought him soup when he was ill, the way she'd laughed at his old jokes, the way she made the house feel alive again. Back then, he truly believed she cared. The warmth of those memories burned through the cold air, almost painful now. He whispered to himself, "You almost made me forget what loneliness felt like." But the ember cracked suddenly, breaking his thought. Like the memory itself was reminding him that warmth had never been real. It was bait. Arthur's mind drifted through scenes of their past, her laughter in the garden, her helping hands as they decorated for Christmas, the gentle way she'd tucked a blanket around his legs. Yet as he looked back now, those same moments felt distorted, darker. Her eyes, once soft and caring, seemed sharper in memory, studying him rather than seeing him. He remembered a day when she helped him organize his old photographs. She had lingered on a picture of him and his late wife, tracing her finger over the gold frame. "You must miss her," she'd said. But now, replaying it in his head, he recalled the faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips when she added, "At least she left you well off." Arthur's stomach twisted at the memory. Every kind word, every kind gesture. It had all been theater. And he'd paid the price of admission with trust. A gust of wind slipped through the window cracks, making the fire flicker wildly. Arthur stood and walked to the old piano, his wife's piano, its keys untouched for years. He pressed one softly, a trembling note breaking the silence. "You would have seen through her," he whispered to the empty room, imagining his wife's voice answering back. But regret was useless now. He couldn't change what had been done. He picked up a small photo from the piano, him, his wife, and a younger version of himself smiling at a life that once felt safe. His reflection stared back from the glass, older, weaker, but wiser. Then behind him in the mirror, he saw something move, Clara's shadow passing in the hallway. She paused, then continued without a word. Arthur's grip tightened on the photo frame. "Keep walking," he murmured. "The past isn't done with you yet." The next morning arrived heavy with silence. Even the birds seemed to avoid singing near the house. Arthur sat at his desk, the same one where he had once signed business papers, love letters, and holiday cards with his wife. But this time, his hands trembled over a blank sheet of paper. The truth had been crawling through his mind for days, whispering in every heartbeat, "She needs to be exposed." Clara's mask had slipped too many times for him to ignore anymore. Every lie, every fake smile, every gentle pat on the shoulder, it had all led to this moment. He looked out the window where she stood in the garden, pretending to water flowers that weren't even alive anymore. "You wanted my world," he muttered under his breath. "Then you'll have it, when I'm gone." And with that, he began to write. Slow, deliberate, and full of quiet fury. His pen scratched across the paper, every word carving out a confession not of guilt, but of awareness. He wrote about how Clara had slowly gained his trust, how she had inserted herself into his life under the pretense of kindness. He detailed how she had whispered about loyalty while plotting for his estate, how she had manipulated his emotions when he was weakest. To whoever finds this, he wrote, know that she wore friendship like a costume, stitched together with greed. The ink blotched where his hand shook, but he didn't stop. Each line carried his final strength, his last act of control. He sealed the truth not just in words, but in evidence. Bank statements, letters, and small notes she thought he hadn't noticed her forging. He folded everything neatly, placed it in an envelope marked, "To be opened upon my death." Then he sat back, breathing out a long, painful calm. "Now, Clara," he whispered, "your performance is almost over." Arthur leaned back in his chair, the paper sealed, his conscience clear. For the first time in months, he felt peace, like the weight on his chest had finally loosened. The ticking of the clock filled the room like a heartbeat, slow and steady. From the hallway, he heard Clara humming softly, that same sweet tune she always used when pretending everything was perfect. Her shadow stretched under the door as she passed by, unaware that the very house she haunted had just turned against her. Arthur smiled faintly to himself. He had written his ending, but hers was only beginning. The fire crackled beside him, its warmth fading as his eyelids grew heavy. He whispered to the air, "Let the truth find her, even when I can't." And as the flames dimmed, the house fell into a silence so deep it felt like it was holding its breath. The next day began with a strange stillness that hung over the house like fog. Clara noticed it the moment she woke up. The air felt heavier, the usual creak of Arthur's cane was missing, and the kettle in the kitchen remained cold. She walked down the hallway, her slippers brushing the carpet softly. "Arthur?" she called, her tone pretending to sound caring, though her voice carried a tremor she didn't recognize. The smell of old wood and faint smoke lingered from the fireplace, mixing with something colder, the scent of absence. She pushed open his study door and froze. Arthur sat in his chair, still and peaceful, as if asleep with the morning light spilling across his face. The pen lay beside him, ink dried mid-thought. "Arthur," she whispered, stepping closer. But deep down she already knew. This was no sleep. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, forcing her eyes to glisten. "Oh, Arthur, no. Please," she whispered, touching his cold hand. Her heart wasn't mourning. It was racing. This was what she'd been waiting for, wasn't it? The inheritance, the estate, the life she thought she'd earned through careful manipulation. Yet as she stared at his face, something about his faint smile unsettled her. It wasn't peaceful, it was knowing. She rushed to the phone, dialing with shaking hands, her voice cracking as she screamed to the housekeeper, "He's gone! Arthur's gone!" But inside, beneath the trembling voice and false sobs, a darker whisper rose. Finally. Still that smile, that quiet, haunting smile, kept echoing in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. It was as though he'd died with a secret she wasn't supposed to survive. Hours later, the house filled with murmurs of police, doctors, and neighbors offering hollow condolences. Clara moved among them like a ghost in her own show, wiping tears, pretending weakness, playing her final act. But when she entered Arthur's study again, something caught her eye. His desk drawer was slightly open. Inside, she saw an envelope marked with heavy handwriting, "To be opened upon my death." Her pulse spiked, breath catching in her throat. She reached out, her hand hovering over it. Was it for her? Was it about her? The name on the corner read not Clara, but executor of the will. She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door as if someone might see her. Carefully, she slid the envelope out, feeling its weight, thick, heavy, dangerous. Her hand trembled as she whispered, "What did you do, old man?" The letter seemed to whisper back in silence. Told them the truth. 3 days later, the house that once felt like Clara's triumph now echoed with tension. Heavy curtains blocked the daylight, and the air carried the faint scent of dust and lilies from Arthur's funeral bouquet. The lawyer, Mr. Harland, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, sat across from her, his briefcase resting neatly beside the armchair. 2 witnesses, old friends of Arthur's, were also present, their faces unreadable. Clara sat straight, dressed in black lace, her expression the perfect blend of sorrow and grace. Yet inside, her stomach churned. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown. She tried to smile politely, but her fingers dug into her chair. "Let's get this over with," she murmured. Mr. Harlan nodded solemnly and opened a thick folder. "Mr. Arthur Bennett left behind clear instructions," he said. "And a personal letter to be read aloud." Clara's pulse quickened. "A personal letter?" Her throat went dry. The lawyer unfolded the paper, his tone calm but deliberate. "To those gathered here," he began, "I thank you for being a part of my life, even after I've left it." The room fell still. Clara stared at the letter, her heart hammering. Then his words shifted. The tone changed. "And to my dear friend, Miss Clara Hale." Her name cut through the silence like a blade. "You came into my life when I was vulnerable. You brought laughter, warmth, and deceit. You wore kindness like a mask and studied my heart like a map. But I am not the fool you hoped I would be." The witnesses exchanged glances, whispering quietly. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Harlan continued, voice steady. "I have left evidence of your intentions, your manipulations, and your forged signatures, all enclosed with this will. They belong to the rightful authorities." A chill spread through her chest, turning her hands ice cold. Clara forced a trembling laugh. "This must be some mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Arthur was confused near the end. You all know that?" But no one responded. Mr. Harlan simply met her eyes, calm, unwavering. "Mr. Bennett was of sound mind, Miss Hale. He wanted truth, not pity." He handed her a smaller envelope addressed directly to her. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was just a single line, written in Arthur's faint handwriting. "The masks always fall, my dear, even when the stage goes dark." The paper slipped from her hand, drifting to the floor like ash. The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first time, Clara's perfect poise cracked. Her eyes darted wildly as the truth sank in. The empire she had built on lies was collapsing, and the man she betrayed had orchestrated it all, even from the grave. The following week, Clara could no longer walk through town without feeling eyes on her. The whispers started small, soft, uncertain, but they grew like wildfire. "Did you hear about Arthur Bennett's will? They say she tricked him. The poor man knew all along." The gossip wrapped around her like a net, tightening each day. At the grocery store, the cashier avoided her gaze. At the post office, a neighbor crossed the street rather than greet her. Her carefully built image, the kind caretaker, the devoted friend, was rotting in public. Every smile she tried to give was returned with suspicion. That night, she tore the local newspaper in half when she saw the headline, "Mystery Surrounds Clara Hale After Shocking Will Revelation." Her hands shook as she whispered, "He's still haunting me, even now." And deep down, she feared it was true. Days turned into nights without rest. Clara began hearing things. Soft creaks in the hallway, faint footsteps near Arthur's old study. Once, while pouring herself a drink, she swore she heard his voice behind her, calm and distant. "You always wanted my house, Clara. How does it feel now that it's yours?" The glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Her breathing quickened as she turned, but no one was there. The framed photograph of Arthur and his wife had fallen face down again, even though she'd fixed it that morning. "Stop it!" she hissed into the air, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "You're gone!" But the house groaned in reply, long, slow, and hollow, as if disagreeing with her. Every corner began to feel like it was watching her back. The knock at the door came just past midnight. Clara froze, heart pounding. Through the frosted glass, she could see the faint outline of two figures, one tall, one shorter. She hesitated, then opened the door a crack. "Miss Hale?" a man's voice said. "Detective Rowan, County Police." The badge flashed in the dim light. "We'd like to ask a few questions regarding Mr. Bennett's estate and the forged documents found in his files." The words hit her like ice water. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, trying to close the door, but Rowan's foot stopped it. His expression was calm but cold. "We'll need you to come with us for a formal statement." Behind him, the second officer's flashlight gleamed across the porch, landing briefly on the garden where Arthur used to sit. The same chair he died beside was still there, rocking slightly in the wind. Clara's voice trembled. "He planned this, didn't he?" The detective didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. The small, windowless room smelled of metal and dust. A single light hung from the ceiling, humming faintly. Clara sat at the steel table, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. Detective Rowan stood across from her, flipping through a thin folder filled with papers. Arthur's bank records, signed checks, and the note from his will. The ticking clock behind him felt louder than her own heartbeat. "Miss Hale," Rowan began calmly, "you had full access to Mr. Bennett's finances for over a year. Yet during that time, several unauthorized withdrawals were made. Care to explain?" She lifted her chin slightly, forcing a fragile smile. "Arthur trusted me. I handled things for him when he wasn't well." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "Convenient," he said quietly, laying down a document, her forged signature, perfectly matching his handwriting. Clara's stomach dropped. The air seemed to close in around her. She realized Arthur had left no room for escape. Hours passed, each question slicing deeper than the last. "Why did you move into his home so suddenly? Why did you isolate him from his lawyer for months? And why, Miss Hale, did you try to open the sealed envelope before the executor arrived?" Clara's replies became shorter, sharper, desperate. "I didn't," she snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "He wanted me there. He needed me." Her voice echoed through the empty room. Detective Rowan leaned forward, lowering his tone. "Or maybe you needed him, until he became a problem." She froze, eyes darting to the mirror behind him. Her reflection looked pale, sickly, like someone she didn't recognize. For a moment, she thought she saw Arthur's faint silhouette behind the glass, standing over her shoulder, watching silently. She blinked, and it was gone. But the chill it left behind refused to leave her bones. Rowan finally closed the folder. "You know, Clara," he said softly, "guilt has a way of showing itself, even when people think they've buried it deep." He stood, gathering his papers. "We'll be in touch." As he left, the door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the dim light. The silence pressed against her ears. She buried her face in her hands, trembling. "He's dead," she whispered. "He can't hurt me anymore." But when she lifted her head, she noticed something impossible. The edge of the interrogation table bore a faint scratch, as though carved by a fingernail. 3 words, rough and shallow, "Truth finds you." Her breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered, backing away from the table. "No, no." But the words were there, solid, cold, undeniable. And in that moment, Clara realized, Arthur Bennett wasn't done with her yet. Clara stepped back into the house, the wooden floors groaning beneath her feet like voices from the past. Every room seemed darker, smaller, suffocating in the absence of Arthur's warmth, the warmth that had never truly been hers. The fireplace still had cold ashes from weeks ago, and the furniture, once arranged for her comfort, felt like cages. She could hear faint creaks as if the house itself were breathing, watching her every move. The silence was thick, pressing against her temples. A cold draft brushed past her neck, and she shivered. On the mantelpiece lay the envelope again, untouched, staring at her like a judge waiting for her sentence. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. "Why is it still here?" she wondered, dread pooling in her stomach. As she moved through the hallway, whispers began to curl around her ears, faint, almost imperceptible at first. "You lied. You betrayed." The voice seemed to come from every direction, echoing off walls and floorboards. She spun, seeing nothing but her own reflection in the darkened windows. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting into forms that resembled Arthur's silhouette, tall, patient, accusing. She tried to laugh, to convince herself it was imagination, but the whispers grew louder. The wind outside howled in harmony with them. When she reached the study, she noticed that the floorboard under the desk, where Arthur had hidden the true will, was slightly ajar. Her hand reached for it, shaking, and she pulled out papers she had never seen before. The handwriting on them was unmistakable, Arthur's final damning confessions. Clara sank to the floor, clutching the papers like a lifeline and a curse all at once. Her vision blurred and tears fell freely. She read the words over and over, every manipulation, every lie, every crime documented in cold, meticulous detail. The house felt alive now, closing in on her with each breath. The shadows moved closer, whispering her guilt, her fear, her failure. She banged her fists against the walls, screaming, but the only reply was the soft crackle of the fireplace and the echoes of her own voice. "No, no, it can't end like this," she cried. But the house, Arthur's house, was patient. It had waited years for this moment, and Clara finally understood. She had never controlled him. She had never escaped him. She had only walked into the trap he had set long ago, and now there was no one left to save her. The next morning, news crews had gathered outside the estate, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. Clara tried to maintain composure, but every step she took toward the front door felt heavier than the last. Detective Rowan approached her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hale," he said, "we've confirmed everything in the documents Mr. Bennett left. All your fraudulent activities, manipulations, and forgeries, every word is backed by evidence." Her eyes widened, and she stumbled back. The house, silent and brooding behind her, seemed to lean closer as if bearing witness to her unraveling. The crowd outside murmured, whispers now transformed into judgment. "She's guilty. He outsmarted her even in death." Clara felt the walls of the world collapsing around her. Her perfect facade, once untouchable, was gone. Rowan handed her a sealed letter, the same one Arthur had prepared for her. She read it aloud silently, her voice shaking. Each line tore at her carefully built life. His meticulous records, the proof of deceit, and the ultimate truth that every act she thought hidden had been witnessed, recorded, and preserved. She could feel the eyes of the media, the law, and the town pressing into her very being. Even the neighbors she once charmed now turned away, some shaking their heads, others whispering the name Clara Hale with scorn. She realized with a jolt she would never walk free in the world she had tried to control. Arthur had left a trap that wasn't about revenge alone. It was about exposing the truth and leaving her no escape. Her heart pounded. He had seen everything, and he had won. Clara sank to the steps of the mansion, her hands trembling and hair disheveled. The wind whipped around her like Arthur's quiet laughter echoing from beyond. She looked up at the house, once her fortress of greed, now a tomb of her ambition. No amount of money, charm, or deception could undo what had been revealed. The law would take its course, but more than that, every corner of the house, every whisper of wind, every shadow would haunt her forever. Arthur's plan had worked. Justice, slow and deliberate, had been delivered. As she wept, the mansion stood silent, patient, and immovable, a monument to truth, cunning, and the downfall of those who betray it. The old man's final victory was complete, and somewhere in the stillness, the faintest whisper floated, "Masks always fall." Eventually, they say betrayal hurts most when it comes from the one who called you friend, but I've learned it's not betrayal that destroys you, it's blindness. We see the signs, yet choose to look away because we crave love more than truth. In the end, she didn't just lose my inheritance, she lost her reflection. When masks fall, they break. And beneath hers, there was nothing but emptiness. If you've ever trusted someone too much, remember this. Loyalty tested by greed is the only loyalty that lasts. I may be gone now, but my story remains, not as revenge, but as a reminder. Because sometimes the greatest justice is letting the truth speak for itself.